The stallion arrived at Millbrook Ranch like a thunderstorm made flesh, his hooves pounding the earth with such fury that the ground trembled beneath him. Coal-black with eyes that burned like molten copper, he reared against the trailer's restraints, his piercing screams echoing across the valley like the wails of something damned ranch owner. Cordelia Vance watched from behind the safety of her pickup truck as 3 experienced wranglers struggled to unload the beast. She'd paid a fortune for this mustanger, descendant of the legendary wild horses that once roamed these lands, but now she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "Easy, boy," called out veteran wrangler Jasper Thornfield, his weathered hands gripping a lead rope. The horse's response was immediate and violent. With a sound like breaking thunder, the stallion struck out with his front hooves, catching Jasper across the chest and sending him flying into the wooden fence with a sickening crack. Young ranch hand Mackenzie Holloway rushed forward to help, only to dive sideways as the horse's teeth snapped at the air where her head had been. The animal's fury seemed endless, supernatural even, as if some primal rage had taken hold of him. "Get back," shouted Foreman Sterling Blackstone, but his warning came too late. The horse pivoted with deadly precision, his hind legs lashing out and catching Sterling in the ribs. The impact sent him tumbling across the dirt, gasping and clutching his side. Dr. Beatrice Caldwell, the ranch's veterinarian, approached with a tranquilizer gun, her hands steady despite the chaos. "I can sedate him," she called out, but even as she raised the weapon, the horse seemed to sense the threat. He wheeled toward her, his copper eyes blazing with intelligence and malice. The stallion charged, and Beatrice barely managed to leap behind a hay bale before those deadly hooves crashed into the spot where she'd been standing. The tranquilizer dart went wide, embedding itself harmlessly in the barn wall. More ranch hands arrived, drawn by the commotion, but each attempt to approach the horse ended in disaster. Rancher Dutch Holbrook tried to corner him with a lasso, only to have the rope torn from his hands as the horse spun and kicked, narrowly missing Dutch's head. Young cowgirl Phoenix Westbrook attempted to approach from the horse's blind spot, but the animal seemed to have eyes in the back of his head, whirling to face her with teeth bared. One by one, the horse drove them all back, his rage seeming to grow with each passing moment. He struck at the wooden fence posts, splintering them like matchsticks. He reared and screamed, his voice carrying across the ranch like a war cry. Cordelia clutched her radio, her hands shaking as she prepared to call for backup. This wasn't just a difficult horse, this was something else entirely. The stallion moved with purpose, with intelligence, as if he understood exactly what he was doing to these people. Then, through the dust and chaos, she saw him. A lone figure emerged from the equipment barn, walking with slow, measured steps toward the raging stallion. The cowboy was tall and lean, with silver hair beneath a battered hat and eyes the color of desert storms. He carried no rope, no weapon, nothing but an aura of absolute calm that seemed to cut through the chaos like a blade. The horse noticed him too, turning those burning copper eyes toward the approaching figure. But something strange happened. Stallion's ears pricked forward, and for the first time since his arrival, he stood perfectly still. Ranch hand Delilah Morwood watched in stunned silence as the mysterious cowboy continued his approach. She'd worked at Millbrook Ranch for 3 years, but she'd never seen this man before. He moved like someone who'd spent a lifetime reading the language of horses, each step deliberate and respectful. "Who is that?" whispered veterinarian Beatrice Caldwell, her tranquilizer gun now forgotten in her hands. "Name's Flint Rollins," came the gravelly voice of old-timer Gideon Fairweather. who'd been watching from the safety of the barn. Heard he was coming to help with the new stock, but I ain't seen him since he got here this morning. The stallion's copper eyes never left Flint's face as the cowboy drew closer. The horse's massive chest still heaved with exertion, his coat slick with sweat and foam. But the wild fury that had driven him moments before seemed to ebb like a tide. 20 feet away, Flint stopped. The injured ranch hands held their breath, expecting another explosion of violence. But the horse simply stood there, his ears swiveling forward in what looked almost like curiosity. "Everyone stay back," Flint said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the tense silence. "Don't move, don't speak. Just let him be." For several long moments, man and horse regarded each other across the dusty ground. The stallion's nostrils flared as he tested the air, reading sense and intentions with the ancient wisdom of his kind. Flint remained perfectly still, his hands loose at his sides, his breathing slow and even. Then, impossibly, the horse took a step forward. Ranch owner Cordelia Vance felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the same animal that had terrorized her entire crew, the same beast that had sent 3 grown men to the hospital. Yet here he was, approaching this stranger with something that looked almost like trust. Another step, then another. The stallion's powerful neck arched slightly, his head lowering in what horsemen recognized as a gesture of respect. The copper fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed, but it had changed somehow from rage to something deeper, more complex. Flint waited until the horse was close enough that he could see his own reflection in those burning eyes. Then, without warning, he reached out with his right hand, not toward the horse's head where most people would try to touch, but toward the animal's shoulder. The stallion didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, he stood perfectly still as Flint's weathered palm made contact with his sweat-dampened coat. "What the hell?" breathed Foreman Sterling Blackstone, still clutching his injured ribs. But Flint wasn't finished. He moved, his hand slowly along the horse's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the skin, reading the animal's body language like a book written in a language only he could understand. The stallion's breathing began to slow, his stance relaxing. Incrementally, then Flint leaned close to the horse's ear, so close that his hat brim touched the animal's forelock. The watching ranch hands strained to hear what he might say, what words of wisdom or magic commands he might whisper. But when Flint spoke, it wasn't words at all. It was a single, low sound, something between a whistle and a hum, rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, primal and ancient, like the voice of the land itself. The effect was immediate and profound. The stallion's eyes half closed, his head dropping lower as if in recognition of something long forgotten. His powerful body swayed slightly, and for a moment he looked not like a creature of fury and violence, but like what he truly was, a wild thing far from home, confused and afraid. Ranch hand Mackenzie Holloway felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the transformation. The horse that had terrorized them all just minutes before now stood quiet and still, his copper eyes fixed on Flint's face with something that looked remarkably like gratitude. "How did you... Cordelia began, but Flint raised his free hand slightly, a gesture that asked for continued silence. The cowboy continued his strange, wordless song, and the horse listened as if his life depended on it. Dr. Beatrice Caldwell lowered her tranquilizer gun completely, her medical training warring with what she was witnessing, the stallion's vital signs visible in the rise and fall of his chest. The position of his ears, the set of his muscles had changed completely. Where moments before she'd seen an animal in full fight or flight mode, now she observed something approaching serenity. Flint Rollins continued his haunting vocalization, the sound weaving through the desert air like smoke. It wasn't a melody, exactly, but something older, a rhythm that seemed to match the horse's heartbeat. The whisper of wind through sagebrush, the distant call of eagles soaring over Red Canyon walls. Young ranch hand Phoenix Westbrook found herself unconsciously swaying to the sound, her own breathing synchronizing with the horse's. "It's like he's speaking horse," she whispered to Delilah Morwood, who stood transfixed beside her. "Not speaking," corrected old Gideon Fairweather, his weathered face creased with something approaching reverence. "Remembering, that's the old way the way men talked to horses before there were words for it." The stallion's transformation continued. His neck, which had been arched in aggression, now curved in a graceful bow. His tail, which had been lashing with fury, hung quiet and still. Most remarkably, his eyes, those burning copper orbs that had promised violence, now held a depth of understanding that seemed almost human. Flint's hand moved slowly along the horse's neck, his touch speaking volumes about trust and respect. The stallion leaned into the contact, his massive weight shifting as he found balance not just in his body, but in his spirit. "He's not broken," Flint said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's remembering." Ranch owner Cordelia Vance stepped forward cautiously, her business instincts warring with her wonder. Remembering what? When horses and men were partners, not master and slave. Flint's eyes never left the stallion's face. "This one's got the blood of the old herds, the ones that ran free before the fences came. He remembers what it was like when respect flowed both ways." The horse's ears pricked forward at the sound of Flint's voice, as if he understood every word. His breathing had slowed to a natural rhythm, and the foam that had covered his coat was beginning to dry. Foreman Sterling Blackstone struggled to his feet, his ribs aching but his curiosity overcoming his pain. But why did he attack everyone else? "We weren't trying to hurt him." "Fear," Flint replied simply. "Fear dressed up as anger. You approached him like he was property to be managed. He approached you like he was a warrior defending his freedom." The stallion's head turned slightly towards Sterling, and for a moment the ranch hands tensed. But instead of aggression, they saw something that might have been acknowledgement, perhaps even apology. "He's not a normal horse," continued Flint, his hand now resting on the stallion's withers. "This one's got the spirit of the wild still burning in him. Break that spirit, and you'll have a broken horse. Work with it." He paused, and the horse's ears swiveled to catch every word. "Work with it, and you'll have a partner worth his weight in gold." Veterinarian Beatrice Caldwell approached slowly, her medical bag in hand. "The men he injured, Jasper, Dutch, the others, they're going to need attention." The stallion's eyes tracked her movement, but there was no aggression in his gaze now. Instead, he seemed to be studying her with intelligent curiosity. "He knows," Flint said quietly. "He knows he hurt them, and he knows they were just doing their jobs, but he also knows they didn't understand what they were dealing with." "And you do?" Cordelia asked. For the first time, Flint smiled a slow, sad expression that spoke of years spent in the company of creatures who remembered what the world had been like before men had fenced it all away. "I've been where he's been," he said. Simply, "I've felt the walls closing in, felt the fear that makes you fight even when you don't want to. Sometimes, understanding is the only medicine that matters." As if in response to his words, the stallion took another step closer, his massive head coming to rest near Flint's shoulder. The gesture was unmistakably one of trust, the kind of trust that could only be earned, never forced. The assembled ranch hands watched in stunned silence as the horse that had terrorized them all now stood quiet and calm, his copper eyes reflecting, not fury, but something approaching peace. The sun climbed higher over Millbrook Ranch as Flint Rollins began the delicate process of leading the stallion toward the specially reinforced paddock that had been prepared for him. With each step, the horse's demeanor grew calmer, his powerful stride matching the measured pace of the cowboy beside him. Ranch hand Mackenzie Holloway hurried ahead to open the gates, her movements careful and deliberate. She'd learned her lesson about sudden movements around this particular horse, but now she found herself watching in fascination as the animal that had seemed like a demon, incarnate just an hour ago, walked docilely beside Flint. "How long have you been doing this?" asked Dr. Beatrice Caldwell as she fell into step beside them, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. "All my life," Flint replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "My grandfather taught me the old ways, said horses were speaking to men long before men learned to speak to horses." The stallion's ears swiveled toward the sound of their voices, but his copper eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. His breathing was deep and regular now, the frantic edge of fear finally beginning to fade. Young Phoenix Westbrook watched from the fence line, her own breathing synchronized with the horse's steady rhythm. "What was that sound you made? That ... song?" Flint's weathered hand moved along the horse's neck in a gentle, continuous motion. "It's older than words. My people, the Rollins family, we've been horse whisperers for 7 generations. That sound, it's the voice of the wind through the canyons where the wild herds used to run. It's the sound of freedom." As they approached the paddock, the stallion's steps began to slow. His head came up, and for a moment the old tension returned to his muscles. The enclosed space, even as large as it was, represented confinement, the very thing his wild spirit rebelled against. "Easy, partner," Flint murmured, his voice carrying that same ancient cadence. "It's not a cage, it's a sanctuary, ranch owner." Cordelia Vance had been watching from a distance, but now she approached with careful steps. "He's going to need a name," she said quietly. "For the registry, for the insurance, ... The stallion's head turned toward her and she froze. Those copper eyes studied her with an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through her. But instead of the malevolent fury she'd seen before, she now saw something else, a kind of weary wisdom, as if the horse had seen too much of the world and found most of it wanting. "He already has a name," Flint said softly. "Don't you, boy?" The horse's ears pricked forward, and he made a sound not quite a whinny, not quite a snort, but something uniquely his own. It was a sound of acknowledgement, of recognition. "He's called Windcaller," Flint continued, "named for the storms that used to race across the high plains, back when the world was wider and wilder." Delilah Morwood, who had been tending to the injured ranch hands, now approached with an update. "Jasper's got 3 cracked ribs, but he'll be fine. Dutch has a concussion, and Sterling's got some deep bruising. They're all asking about the horse." Windcaller's great head dropped slightly, and he made another sound, this one softer, almost apologetic. It was as if he understood that his fear had caused pain, and he regretted it. "Tell them he's sorry," Flint said simply. "Tell them he was afraid, and fear makes us all do things we wish we hadn't." As they entered the paddock, Windcaller's tension began to ease once more. The space was large enough for him to move freely, with shade from ancient oak trees and a clean water trough that caught the morning sunlight. It wasn't freedom, but it was respectful. Captivity, a place where his dignity could remain intact. Flint began to remove the lead rope, his movements slow and deliberate. This would be the ultimate test. Would the horse stay calm once he realized he was no longer physically connected to the one person who had shown him understanding? The rope came free, and Windcaller stood perfectly still. His copper eyes found Flint's face, and in that gaze was a question. What happens now? Now you rest, Flint said quietly. You've had a long journey, and you're tired. This is a good place, with good people. They'll learn to understand you, just like you'll learn to understand them. The stallion considered this, his intelligent eyes taking in the paddock, the watching humans, the wide sky overhead. Then, as if making a decision, he walked to the center of the enclosure and lowered his head to drink from the water trough. It was a gesture of acceptance, the first step toward whatever came next. 3 days had passed since Windcaller's violent arrival, and the atmosphere at Millbrook Ranch had shifted dramatically. The stallion that had terrorized the crew now stood quietly in his paddock, his copper eyes tracking the daily activities with keen interest rather than hostility. Flint Rollins had barely left the horse's side, sleeping in the adjacent barn and taking his meals by the fence line. He'd established a routine that spoke to something deep in Windcaller's spirit. Morning visits that began with that same haunting, wordless song, followed by hours of quiet companionship that required no halters, no ropes, no symbols of dominance. Dr. Beatrice Caldwell had been documenting the transformation with the fascination of a scientist witnessing something unprecedented. His stress indicators have dropped to normal levels, she reported to ranch owner Cordelia Vance. Heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, everything suggests he's achieved a state of contentment I've never seen in a recently captured Mustang. Young ranch hand Phoenix Westbrook had become a regular visitor to the paddock, drawn by the same magnetic quality that seemed to radiate from the horse. He watches everything, she told Delilah Morwood as they observed Flint working with Wind. It's like he's trying to understand how this place works, what his role might be. The change wasn't just in the horse. The entire ranch crew had been affected by what they'd witnessed. Injured foreman Sterling Blackstone, despite his cracked ribs, had insisted on returning to work just to watch Flint's methods. I've been working with horses for 20 years, he told old Gideon Fairweather, but I've never seen anything like this. Veterinarian Jasper Thornfield, still recovering from his encounter with Windcaller, had become one of the horse's most ardent admirers. He could have killed me, he said quietly, watching as the stallion stood motionless while Flint cleaned his hooves, but when he had the chance, he pulled back. Even in his fury, he held something in reserve. The breakthrough came on the 4th morning. Flint had been working with Windcaller for over an hour, their communication consisting entirely of body language and that strange, ancient song. The horse had allowed himself to be groomed, his coat now gleaming like polished obsidian in the morning sun. He's ready, Flint announced to the assembled ranch hands. Ready for what? Asked Cordelia, though something in her chest told her she already knew, to show you what he really is. Flint opened the paddock gate and stepped back. For a moment, Windcaller stood perfectly still, his copper eyes fixed on the open portal. Freedom lay just beyond that gate, not the vast freedom of the wild plains, but the more immediate freedom of movement within the ranch. The stallion's ears swiveled forward, and he took a single step toward the opening. Then another. The watching humans held their breath, expecting him to bolt for the distant fence line, to make a desperate bid for the wilderness that called to his blood instead. Windcaller stopped just outside the gate and turned to look at Flint. His great head lowered slightly, and he made that unique sound, again the one that had become his signature greeting. It was a sound of trust, of partnership, of questions being asked and answered without words. "Show them," Flint said softly. What happened next would become the stuff of legend at Millbrook Ranch. Windcaller began to move, but not in the panicked flight they'd expected. Instead, he started to dance. It began as a simple walk, but with each step, the horse's movements became more fluid, more purposeful. His hooves struck the ground in a rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat of the earth itself. His neck arched, in a display of power and grace that took the breath away from everyone watching. This wasn't the desperate bucking of a trapped animal. This was the proud display of a creature who knew his own worth, who understood that he was being given the chance to show his true nature rather than having it beaten out of him. Phoenix. Westbrook felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the stallion move with a freedom that transcended physical space. "He's not just running," she whispered. "He's celebrating." Windcaller's dance carried him in wide circles around the ranch yard, his copper eyes bright with joy rather than fury. He approached each person who had witnessed his transformation, not with aggression, but with a kind of regal acknowledgement. To Sterling, he offered a gentle nod. To Beatrice, a soft whinny. To young Phoenix, he extended his muzzle for the briefest of touches, but it was to Flint that he returned, his dance concluding with a display of trust that left everyone speechless. The great stallion approached the cowboy and gently placed his massive head against Flint's chest, his copper eyes closing in contentment. "He's not just tame," Cordelia breathed, her voice filled with wonder. He's chosen to be here." Flint's weathered hand moved along Windcaller's neck, and the horse sighed a sound of deep satisfaction that seemed to come from his very soul. "Partnership," Flint said simply. "Not mastery, partnership." 6 months had transformed Millbrook Ranch into something extraordinary. Word of Windcaller and Flint Rollins had spread throughout the region, bringing visitors from as far as Montana and Nevada, ranchers, trainers, and horse enthusiasts, all eager to witness the partnership that had redefined what was possible between human and horse. The stallion had become more than just an attraction. He'd become a teacher. Under Flint's guidance, the entire ranch crew had learned new approaches to horse handling, methods that emphasized respect and understanding over dominance and control. The results had been remarkable, not just with the difficult horses, but with all the animals in their care. Phoenix Westbrook had become Flint's most dedicated student, her natural empathy for horses enhanced by the techniques she'd learned. She could now approach even the most skittish animals with confidence, her movements carrying the same deliberate calm that had made Flint legendary. "It's not about controlling them," she explained to a group of visiting ranchers, her hand resting on Windcaller's shoulder. "It's about understanding what they need and finding a way to meet in the middle." The stallion had become a willing participant in these demonstrations, his copper eyes bright with intelligence as he showed newcomers what trust looked like. He would stand motionless while strangers approached, his very stillness a testament to the security he'd found in his new life. Dr. Beatrice Caldwell had documented the transformation for veterinary journals, her papers describing techniques that challenged conventional wisdom about horse training. "The stress-related behaviors we typically see in captured mustangs," she wrote, "can be eliminated entirely through proper communication and respect for the animal's psychological needs." But it was the personal transformations that truly mattered. Foreman Sterling Blackstone once a believer in traditional braking methods, had become an advocate for Flint's approach. "You can break a horse's spirit," he told new ranch hands, "but you can't break his soul, and it's the soul that makes a true partner." Ranch owner Cordelia Vance had seen her operation evolve from a simple breeding and training facility into something approaching a sanctuary. Horses that had been deemed problem animals by other ranchers found their way to Millbrook, where Flint's methods could unlock their potential. "He's not just training horses," she observed to old Gideon Fairweather as they watched Flint work. "With a recently arrived mare, he's healing them." The old-timer nodded, his weathered face creased with understanding. "Some wounds run deeper than flesh," he said. "Takes someone who's been wounded himself to know how to heal that kind of hurt." As autumn painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson, a delegation arrived from the State Bureau of Land Management. They'd come to observe Windcaller and discuss a revolutionary new program, one that would use Flint's methods to retrain captured Mustangs rather than simply breaking them for adoption. "The old ways aren't working," admitted Bureau Chief Lincoln Hawthorne as he watched Windcaller perform his daily dance of freedom. "We're losing too many horses to stress-related illnesses, and the ones we do place often fail to bond with their new owners." Flint's response was characteristically simple. "Fear breeds fear," he said. "Respect breeds respect. Change the approach, and you change the outcome." The demonstration that followed would be remembered as the moment everything changed. Windcaller, now fully trusting and confident, allowed himself to be approached by complete strangers. He accepted. Their touch responded to their voices, and even performed his graceful dance for their cameras. But it was what happened at the end that truly captured the power of the transformation. As the officials prepared to leave, Windcaller approached each one in turn, offering the same gentle acknowledgement he'd given to his ranch family months before. "He's thanking you," Flint explained to the amazed bureaucrats, "for giving him a chance to show who he really is." Bureau Chief Hawthorne, a man who'd spent 30 years managing wild horses, found himself fighting back tears as the great stallion touched his shoulder with velvet lips. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered, as the sun set over the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Windcaller stood quietly beside Flint in the paddock that had once been his prison and had become his sanctuary. The horse's copper eyes reflected the dying light, and in their depths was a peace that spoke of journey's end and new beginnings. "You did it, boy," Flint said softly, his hand resting on the stallion's neck. "You showed them what was possible." Response was that same unique sound, part whinny, part sigh, part song, that had become his signature. But now it carried a different meaning. Not the desperate cry of a trapped animal, but the contented voice of a creature who had found his place in the world. In the distance, the lights of the ranch house glowed warmly, and the sounds of the evening routine, horses settling for the night, the soft voices of the crew, the whisper of wind through the sage, created a symphony of peace that seemed to embrace everything under the vast desert sky. The horse that had arrived in fury had found his way to serenity. The cowboy who had spoken just one word, the wordless language of understanding, had kept his promise. And in their partnership, both had discovered something precious, that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that sometimes the most powerful transformations happened not through force, but through the simple act of listening to what the other truly needed. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Windcaller and Flint stood together in comfortable silence, their bond a testament to the possibility of finding peace in even the most broken of spirits. The horse that had attacked everyone had become the horse that trusted everyone. And in that transformation lay the promise of a better way forward, not just for horses and humans, but for all creatures seeking to understand and be understood. The ranch settled into evening quiet, but the legacy of what had been accomplished would echo far beyond the borders of Millbrook Ranch, carrying with it the hope that healing was always possible when it was approached with respect, patience, and the ancient wisdom of a single, wordless song.